Well, welcome to our final little video about why sex. We've been looking at a Christian perspective on sex. We looked in Genesis at the beginning for that very foundational verse about the purpose of sex being oneness. We looked as well at the idea that the integral and vital to our understanding of sex is that God wanted it to be an experience of pleasure. That physical pleasure is not antithetical to holiness. It's not connected with sin if it's within the marriage relationship. And we've been looking at Proverbs 5. We looked at 5:19, that very explicit verse about pleasure yesterday. Today we're going to look at a verse that probably has a message that's not quite so popular in our culture here. I'll read it to you. It says, "Do you know the saying, drink from your own rain barrel, draw water from your own spring-fed well? It's true, otherwise you may one day come home and find your barrel empty and your well polluted. Your spring water is for you and you alone, not to be passed around among strangers." Every culture has euphemisms about sex. I'm sure you know some of them from our culture. And back probably in Solomon's day when Proverbs was written, some of the euphemisms about sex and marriage, about the wife, were your own rain barrel or cistern or your spring-fed well. And so that's talking about the marriage relationship, the act of sex with your wife, because this was written mainly for men, for young boys who were going to be leaders in the country. And if there was one word that's summing up the message there, is that sex has a particular context. That context is marriage, and one word sums up what it says about sex within the confines of marriage. It's to be an exclusive relationship, and sex is to happen exclusively within that relationship. Your spring water, in other words, the experience of sex with your wife or your husband would be the contemporary application, is for you and you alone. Now let's remember back to yesterday, God isn't some sort of cosmic Nellie Anderson. He isn't telling us this simply to confine us and restrict our pleasure. In fact, if we go all the way back to our first video and we thought about that foundation for sex, the fact that it's designed for oneness, this restriction here, if we want to call it that, this idea that sex is exclusively for marriage, is because of the purpose that God has for sex, to draw men and women together. Do you remember? To give them Velcro hearts. And it has to happen within the context of an exclusive relationship. And probably we need to do some myth busting about marriage. If we watch the soap operas, if we watch Hollywood films, sex is always exciting and fulfilling outside marriage, part of an affair or perhaps before marriage. And yet the surveys that are done are pointing out that the more sexual partners that you have, the less sexually satisfying subsequent relationships will be. And so what it's saying is that a monogamous relationship, an exclusive relationship, the kind of context that God is speaking about here, is the one that is most likely to deliver a long-lasting and a satisfying sex life. And so essentially what God is talking about here is sexual purity. Spoke about sexual pleasure yesterday and now sexual purity. And you see what we do if we bring those two things together. God is saying that the pathway to sexual pleasure is sexual purity. That the deepest kind of sexual pleasure, that intoxicating love, that satisfying physical experience that draws our hearts together with wives and husbands like Velcro, happens when we are committed to sexual purity, an exclusive sexual relationship with our wife and husband. So hopefully over the last couple of days, as we've thought a little bit about this subject, we've managed to put over a Christian perspective, that we're open and clear about sex being part of God's plan, that sex is good, not dirty, not sinful, within the bounds of a married relationship, that it's about pleasure. God wants it to be a deeply pleasurable experience, and yet there has to be sexual purity. The church isn't being prudish about that. It's not stuck in the past when it comes to that. It's because we believe that we want the best for people, that we are going to stick to what God says about this. Again, if you have any questions, I would be delighted to try and respond to them. You can get me at james@westlakechurch.com. Thanks for taking the time to think over these difficult and really vital issues around sex and sexuality that we've been thinking about.